Hey, welcome back to Connection Point Studies. I'm glad to have you along. We are excited to have Steve Strickler here to help me in this whole series on relationships. Why? Because I probably need a little help in my relationships.
Don't we all?
Yeah. And Steve's really an expert, been a counselor and a good friend as a pastor, has a lot of experience in this. And honestly, Steve, we're going to have to be careful what all we share here in this. It always bothers me a little bit because my wife will, she has a different opinion than I do about things. How about
Oh,
yours?
oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
So
Yeah.
we're going to do our best with this study, but I wish we could be a fly on the wall in the corner of your study because I can't wait to share some of the questions we have. And specifically, this whole series is out of Proverbs. And Proverbs has some very interesting relationship advice. And
And the
so,
counseling offices are open
yeah,
all
wide
week
open,
long, all month
right?
long. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to have a little bit of fun. It's going to be a great time. And as always, we start with a warm up question. In each of these studies, we start with a warm up question. So, Steve, give them a warm up question they get going.
Okay, good. It's really interesting. When someone is looking for a spouse, they're looking for something. And so the question is, what 5 things did you look for, or are you still looking for
In a
in a
spouse.
spouse?
Awesome. And before you come back, we want you to read Proverbs 30, verses 18 through 20, and then Proverbs 6:26, and we'll come back and talk about them. All right, Steve, can you remember back when you were looking for a spouse? What was it?
Well, let's see. It was, I knew I was going to be a preacher, so she had to be a Christian.
Yes.
And
Play the piano.
some churches, they required that she play the piano. And I wanted her to be pretty.
Yeah.
Now, she was homecoming queen, so that worked.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
very good. My brother always, he was a little further along, and what was his advice to people looking for a wife?
Uh,
That she had to be
she,
old.
she wanted to be old, rich, and
Rich.
sick. And if she
Okay.
was sick enough, didn't have to be that old.
Okay, so here's the deal. You guys have a little bit of fun. Hopefully, you had some fun talking about that. But Proverbs has some very interesting things. The scriptures that we had you read said some very interesting things. There were 2 out of 4 things that this guy, the wisest man in the world, had trouble understanding. And the first one was, and how a man loves a woman. And it is really a mystery a bit, isn't it? Steve, you've watched this through the years, haven't you?
Yeah, it really is. And we're made so differently. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole idea of how people process information differently, and then you just exacerbate that with men and women.
But you've seen it, and I've seen it as people have fallen in love with each other. I'm glad it's something we don't completely understand. It is kind of a mysterious
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
But the second thing that he didn't understand, which I think is a struggle for people, and it talks about this adulterous woman
Hmm.
who consumes a man and then wipes her mouth and says, "What's wrong with that?"
Yeah.
And then the Proverbs 6, where it says, "A prostitute will bring you to poverty. And if you sleep with another man's wife, it'll cost you your life." Why do you think that's a temptation in our world? Because it is a
Well,
temptation,
we're
right?
we're we're we live in a barrage of information in our culture with temptations that are sexual. But here's the deal, and I think in counseling, a lot of times people don't understand this, but this is so true. The other woman has all the power because she comes and she goes, and the spouse, the wife, doesn't. She's raising the kid. She's worried
Yeah.
about the bills. She's got her life so tied up with her husband that she has all kinds of points of connection, and this other woman can come and go and float, and so she has the power, and she's dangerous.
Mm. It is. It is a temptation. And I think what I would say to every one of us, and you guys can have hopefully talked about this a little bit, but we need to guard some things in our life and with this temptation and know that it's a temptation. I'm glad Proverbs brings it up because it is a real temptation. Now, the second piece of advice that Proverbs gives is found in Proverbs 21:19, 21:9, and 25:24. So before you come back, here's what I want you to do. I want you to read Proverbs 21:19, Proverbs 21:9, Proverbs 25:24. And after you've read them and laughed for a while, I want you to turn around and change the gender of those scriptures so that it it's the exact opposite, and then I want you to read them again, and then we'll come back and talk about them. Okay, so Steve, what is the theme of this scripture? What would you say the theme is?
Well, conflict happens,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it just does.
And to live with somebody that's always quarrelsome,
I
it's a
mean,
pain, isn't it?
yeah, and
So are
and
you easy to live with, Steve?
oh well, yeah, I'm a breeze. I'm so
It's
easy to live
Ruthie
with.
that's a problem,
She
right?
has all kinds of problems, but I'm a piece of cake. Absolutely.
Well, all of us have to realize that it's easy to become quarrelsome, and it's easy to be a partner that's hard to live with, right?
It all comes down to turf wars.
Mhm.
You decide what you're going to fight about and what you're not going to fight about. But I have yet to see the relationship that wasn't bombarded with conflicts.
Mhm. And when I look at this whole scripture, I think this wisest man in the world said, "Man, you've got to deal with the conflicts in your life." So we've got a little assignment for this small group. This would be interesting to see this assignment. I want you to give them the assignment, and then we'll give them some scripture to look at. What's the assignment we have for them?
We would like you to spend a little time now coming up with 5 effective ways to resolve conflict, and have fun with this.
Yeah. Before you come back, get those 5 things down, and then read Proverbs 18:22 before we come back, and we'll talk about that. Okay, Steve, I'd be interested to hear what their 5 things were,
I
but
would too.
as a counselor, what do you hope they included a couple things in there? What would the things you would hope they included?
Well, really, one of the biggest things I think is learning to fight fair. It's not that we don't fight, but learning to fight fair. And the way one of the primary ways of doing that is taking the time to understand the other person's point of view, walking a mile in their shoes,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
That's a big thing.
Hopefully you just included that. And I realize that's a really simplistic way of doing things, but at least it begins a structure
Yeah.
to work on with this. Now we had him read Proverbs 8:22, which is an interesting thing. The man who finds a wife finds a treasure and receives favor in the Lord. So a little bit a little bit of a question in my mind is why is it so hard to find a husband and wife? And why do people make so many poor choices? So before we really answer that question, I know you've got to answer that question. I want them to think about those
Okay.
2 questions, and then we'll come back and talk about
Okay.
them. Okay, so why is it so hard to find a wife or a husband?
Is this is G rated? Is it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes we're
This is adults. Come on, it's just
well, we're
all of us,
looking for the
isn't it?
wrong things. We're looking for half the time we're looking for a sexual relationship rather than a partner.
Yeah, you know what? That I think is the number one. I agree with you 100% on that, Steve. I think what happens is they jump into a intimate sexual relationship, which is really easy because we're made with all the equipment, so all the
Yeah,
equipment works, you
yeah.
know. But what we don't realize is that just making the equipment work doesn't get to the heart
It really
of
doesn't.
the
And young
spirit.
young people when they're dating, I mean, what are they looking for? They're looking for someone who's popular. They're looking for someone who's pretty or handsome, something like that. And I have yet to see pretty and handsome pay the bills unless you're really pretty and really handsome and connected.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of other things that are important, right?
Yeah, that is so true. And this whole thing of looking in the wrong way is really the key, isn't
Really
it?
is.
It is. And so, I recognize that Proverbs is really saying a really cool thing here. Is that if you found someone that you really treasure, that they really treasure you, you've really found a really cool
Yeah.
thing.
And I think we need to understand that Proverbs, they are proverbs about wisdom.
Mhm.
These are wise statements.
Mhm.
And so what they're saying to us is when you really find that spouse or that mate, you appreciate who they are. I mean, that may be one of the most important revelations you'll ever have in your life.
This is a great time for you to squeeze the hand of someone you're sitting next to, hopefully your wife or husband. Yeah. And show them a little bit of love. But while you're doing that, take a minute and read Proverbs 15:17, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay, Proverbs 15:17 is like similar to what we've already said here. It's better to have a vegetable a bowl of vegetables with someone you love than a steak with someone you hate.
Yeah.
That's a true
Yeah.
statement, isn't it?
That is so true.
It is really true.
Yeah.
And there's times that well, there's time. I shouldn't say anything. Should I? I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm not going to get in trouble. I'm going to try and get you in trouble. is what
Yeah.
I'm gonna try
Okay.
and do.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we have an assignment for them to do here. We want them to work on this Proverbs 15:17, which is about being in a place where you love each other. Give them the assignment.
Okay. We'd like you to come up with 5 ways to show love and put some thought into this. This can be fun. Put some
Yeah.
thought into this.
Take a little bit of time and do that. And before you come back, we're going to have you read one more scripture, which is Proverbs 19:14. All right, Steve, as a counselor, these guys are all out there working, and maybe they struggled, but what do you hope they really thought about and talked about in that process?
I hope they talked about quality time. I hope they talked about making a very purposeful effort to spend
Yeah.
time with each other. Someone once said that you really spell love, Time. That's
Mhm.
kind of hokey, but it's also kind of true.
Hmm.
Making time together a priority.
And I was even thinking about one change that I had to make, kind of a mid-course correction in my relationship with Audrey, was setting a day that she knew was
Mm.
her day.
Good.
That
good.
was hard for me
Yeah.
because I was
I remember
everybody
because
wanted
that's
my
the day
time.
we used to go fishing.
Yeah, everyone wanted my time, and I wanted my own personal time.
Sure. Yeah.
But to have a day that she got to do what she wanted to do,
Yeah. And you
was really,
you protected that.
yeah, I did, and I wouldn't have scheduled meetings and all that. Finding a rhythm in your relationship is really critical.
Mhm.
Now we ask him to read this Proverbs 19:14, which says that fathers can give their sons an inheritance of houses, wealth, but only the Lord gives an understanding wife or understanding husband.
Yeah.
And that is a really,
Yeah.
really true statement. How does God play into this whole relationship thing? How have you seen God make a difference in their relationships?
God won't go any place where he's not invited.
Mm.
And if we invite him into our most important decisions, all our decisions really, but our most important decisions, he steps in there and gives us a level of wisdom that we ordinarily wouldn't have.
Mm.
And that's really true of marriage. And I can't tell you how many hours I've spent with people who have a lot of money, but their marriage and their family has fallen apart because of bad priorities. It's not, we can make money.
Mhm.
We can be successful in this world. But at the end of the day, when the kids are grown and gone and you're bouncing a grandkid on your lap, what you're celebrating is your relationships. You're not celebrating the bank account.
Yeah. So here's our assignment as you close out the study. You know what we want you to do is to pray for some marriages that are in your group. Maybe you have some married couples. Maybe you have some singles in your group. Maybe you're praying for a future relationship. And this is what Steve is saying. Invite God into that relationship.
That's right.
So take a little bit of time and pray together as a group, and then we'll see you next week at Connection Point Studies. We'll again talk about relationships. Can't wait. Have you back.